Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I was trying to explain what this show's about, and I have to change the explanation every time I give it because it seems to change. Imagine yourself going down kind of a straight and narrow path, and then you say, "Oh, there's a side road. I want to take that side road and see where it leads." Well, that's a pretty good metaphor for anomalies. So, like I said, I'm Dan Hall, one of your hosts. Gwen and Dave, who are sometimes co-hosts, had other obligations, and I've been looking forward to tonight's conversation because I can relate to kind of where this guest is coming from. So tonight we're going to be talking with Liz Entin. Liz, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Sure. Like I say, I'm pretty good for an old guy. Um, we try to choose thought-provoking topics, and Liz wrote a very interesting book and also is a podcaster herself. So it's nice to be in kind of interesting territory. So my first question to you, Liz, is it seems to me that the genesis of your book is about starts with grief, right? Would that be accurate?
It does. Yeah. My book, it's called WTF Just Happened. Um, a sciencey skeptic explores grief, healing, and evidence of an afterlife. So I was prompted to start this exploration based on grief.
Now, as I recall, the grief happens because of the loss of a loved one, your dad, right?
Yes, he passed in 2015. So
Tell tell
that's when I
tell tell us who your dad was.
Sure. So we were very close. He had me later in life, so he wasn't working as hard at that point, so he got to spend a lot of time with me. He was very funny, very exuberant, very generous, always kind of very funny, loved telling jokes, kind of being the life of the party. When so he was yeah, we were really close. He could be very creative. He also liked to write himself and always told great stories.
Is that what you liked most about him? His storytelling ability?
Uh, I think it's hard to say one thing. It's just,
Right.
I think it's hard to break down. I think, I guess maybe a combination of his generosity and like exuberance when he was excited about things. And yeah, I mean, and I think sort of an unconditional support of the choices I was making in my life. And I think, not all parents do that.
That's right. Some parents say, "What the hell are you doing?" But so sounds like
Right,
your
right.
dad wasn't one of those. So I'm guessing he passed suddenly.
Fairly suddenly, not as suddenly as, an accident, but he got sick, he had a stroke, and then was gone 3 months later. But even right when he had the stroke, he was never the same. He never came home. He went right into the hospital and he wasn't coherent. So
Mhm.
there was like a day or two where he was more coherent than others, but it was in that sense very sudden. It was like he was there and then he
Not
wasn't
there.
even. Yeah, yeah.
And that's the tough part about grief. Um,
Oh,
so
yes.
I'm making a guess here. Did you grow up in a religious family?
I did not. I grew
Yeah.
up in a very secular family and culturally Jewish. And my dad was Jewish, my mom's Protestant, but neither of them religious at all. I grew up in New York City.
Mm,
Everyone I was around was super secular. It was just irrelevant. It was like if you ask someone their religion, I was around predominantly Jewish culture. Like I always thought of religion as more of a culture than belief in a God. And it was just completely irrelevant to my life. And I
yeah.
actually still don't really believe in God. So,
Well, I don't think anybody has to. I used to teach sociology for a living, and one of my favorite topics was religion. So, would you say that you consider yourself an atheist or an agnostic, or and maybe labels isn't where we ought to
um,
go?
I guess I tend to say atheist, but in reality, that's a little more extreme, like saying exactly what's going on. I guess I like to say evidentialist, really, and I've never seen any evidence of a God in terms of like a Judeo-Christian God.
Mhm.
Some people will talk about God as a conscious, an inexplicable consciousness. I'm like, okay, there could be an inexplicable consciousness, but anything that I've ever seen explained through a traditional religion, I've never seen any evidence to think anything like that would be real.
Right. So most of those religions that I'm familiar with have some kind of tale, maybe that's the wrong word, but story about an afterlife. What happens to you after you
Mhm.
pass? So what were you expecting when your dad passed?
Um, at that point, well, right when he passed, I'd already started some of the research, but right when he got sick, I mean, I didn't think about it that much because it was pretty scary to think about because I just assumed consciousness was created by our brain cells, and
Right.
when you die, and that's it. So, I mean, it just I didn't really anything else seemed like a bit of a fairy tale and didn't really make any sense. So I just didn't give it much thought. It seemed at the time to me most logical that our brain cells created consciousness, and that's what neuroscientists said. That's what most of science seemed to say, as far as I knew at that point. So
Right.
I didn't really question it very much.
And then people start talking about near-death experiences, and you go, well, wait a minute, if your brain dead, how can you be seeing what's going on with this NDE? So yeah, quite,
Exactly. And
quite
valid psychiatrists and researchers studying them. Like if I just heard people reporting, I'd probably be like, I wouldn't take it so seriously. But then when you start to discover a whole body of scientific research and medical
right.
research based on it, that's when I was like, what's going on?
So what happened in regard to your dad that made you question the, when you're gone kind of scenario?
So I wouldn't say anything exactly happened in my interactions with him initially that made me think that. I was desperate. He was clearly not going to be getting better. I believed science. So my very first thought, I can't say this was super logical, and I didn't think factually, oh, this is something I'll be able to do, but I had kind of a flash of thought in like some of my darkest days thinking, well, so most of science fiction or a huge amount of science fiction has ended up coming true. You know, we have robots on Mars, we are speaking on Zoom, and so cell phones that we carry everywhere. I mean, if you look at old school sci-fi, huge portion of what's going on now would be science fiction not that long ago. So I thought, well, one of the main topics discussed in sci-fi is time travel. Is there any possible way time
Mm,
travel is possible? And if it is, we wouldn't necessarily know. Like if we're time jumping and erase our memories, maybe we're doing it all the time and we don't know. And maybe there'd be some way to go back in time or do something. It was just a thought. So I started I started to read about that, and I started learning a lot about Einstein's theories of time relativity and the twin experiment or the twin thought experiment, and that one where if they're two twins, I'm going to have the exact details wrong, but the concept
sure.
right. One twin travels close to the speed of light, and let's say 10 years pass on Earth, like 2 years passed for that twin traveling close to the speed of light. So just things where I was like, wow, time is not how we perceive it. We experience it one way, but it's really different. So I started thinking, well, and I was reading a little bit more about physics. I was reading some about string theory and other dimensions and the split particle experiment. And I started to think, well, so if time and all these things that seem so set in how they are really different, what else could be out there? And my very first thought along those lines was, well, okay, so if our consciousness is created by our brain neurons and it happened once where it created me and it created my father, why could another set of brain neurons not create another life that I got to live? I wouldn't be Liz again. My dad wouldn't be him. But if the other option's complete obliteration, I'm like, I'll take it. I'll be someone totally different.
Right.
And I actually think if you look at like the most scientific of materialist mind theories that our consciousness is created by brain neurons, it makes more sense that a you, not you as the same person, but just experiencing as if you got to be a totally different person, experience consciousness, it actually makes more sense that that would happen again, whether in this planet, whether another planet in our massive galaxy, whether another iteration of the universe after a big crunch, another big bang, you know, most likely there would be another type of Earth, Goldilocks planet, and this most likely goes on eternally. And so it's like, it makes a lot more sense that we're going to live again in some way. And so I Googled that. And that was the biggest life changer, because I found Doctors Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson. Ian Stevenson has passed away, and Dr. Jim Tucker is his protege. And they were our child psychiatrists at the University of Virginia, studying cases of kids with past life memories. And I was just like, what the fuck? Like, this is crazy. They were, you know, Dr. Stevenson since passed, but Dr. Jim Tucker was being interviewed by Scientific American, NPR, and there was nothing woo about this. They were getting, again, through the University of Virginia. He's a professor, child psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry, and he's getting actual memories that children have of previous lives. And he was getting teams together, and Dr. Stevenson had done the same to investigate them, and they were checking out in many, many ways. And I was just like, this, I don't even know what to say. And I started delving into his work so intensely. And then also finding out the whole existence of the Division of Perceptual Studies there, where that's where Dr. Bruce Grayson studies near-death experiences. And
that name I'm familiar with, Bruce Grayson.
Yeah. They study mediumship. And just even once you start reading about Dr. Jim Tucker, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. I found other researchers studying psychic mediums, studying all of this. And that was just the opener.
So. When you mentioned what you did about time, a guest that we have yet to book, it's always a scheduling conflict. And you might be interested to read about this guy. His name is Ron, R-O-N, Mallet, M-A-L-L-E-T. He's a physicist, and his dad, when he was a young person, his dad passed away from heart attack, kind of thing. And he thought, because of what he knew about physics, that if there would be a way to travel in time, he could go back in time and prevent his dad from dying. Kind of a similar theme type of thing.
What I was thinking, yeah.
I think he maybe, I don't know that he would say that he has completed that experiment, but he certainly believes in time travel. So yeah, there's some very interesting things about the brain and how time works. So it sounds like after your dad passed, in order to heal to the extent you could, you had to do some exploration of something that could only be called the afterlife, which doesn't necessarily fit into the scheme of the way someone who doesn't believe in the afterlife would be thinking. So you mentioned mediums. Did you approach a medium about how to contact your dad?
Oh, I did. And that was such a game changer, because I didn't approach mediums right away. I found the research of Windbridge Institute with Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with them, but the Windbridge Institute does up to quintuple blinded studies on psychic mediums, demonstrating that they can get accurate results and specific results, because you can give really accurate mediumship information, but it could be very general, like, oh, you lost a grandparent, you're like 40 years old, you've lost 2 grandparents, I'm getting, and they loved you, and your grandma baked you cookies. And I mean, it's not hard
to guess,
especially if you're to guess certain things and be correct. So it's specific, highly specific information that could not apply to anybody. And there are a subset of mediums getting highly accurate information and scores up to like 90%. And just statistically impossible. Well, I guess possible because it's happening, but in a materialist consciousness created by a brain world, they're getting statistically impossible results by chance. They eliminated ways they could cheat. I mean, they didn't know in advance who they'd be speaking to. I mean, they weren't even seeing the people. So I delved into everything from Windbridge, and I found, other research. I know the University of Virginia looks a little bit into mediumship. I found old work of the Society of Cyclical Research. I guess they were pretty big in like the first half of the 1900s. And I was just like, there is so much going on. I have got to try to find a medium. And through that was a huge life changer too, and twofold. I found this one medium, Laura Lynn Jackson. So I found her on the Windbridge list. And then I reached out I read a book by another researcher called Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell. And I picked, sort of just like a lot of coincidences came together. So I picked Laura because she was the first on the Windbridge list who was in New York. I was in New York and I was like, I want to do in person. I want to watch and make sure she's not cheating. And I have to see how, what she's up to. So I'm not doing any phone readings. That's what I thought at the time. I actually prefer phone readings now because they can't, even more than video, if you're going to be researching, because they can't watch your micro expressions. They can't find out anything about you. So if you're super skeptical, phone's really good. So then I also found, I've been reading a book by another researcher, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, among the many researchers I was reading. And she does research into psi abilities. And I believe, I could have this wrong, she either was a graduate student at Harvard and a professor at Johns Hopkins, or the other way around, but or had been a professor at both. Either way, she was aligned with both Harvard and Johns Hopkins. I was like, this woman, smart, grounded, not woo. So I emailed her and asked if she'd ever research mediumship in some way and her thoughts on it. And I thought she was just going to write back. There's been some interesting studies done by Windbridge, but nothing conclusive. Instead, she also gave me Laura's name. So I was like, gotta do this. So I reached out to Laura, who has an astronomical wait list. It's closed now. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to wait forever. At the same time, Laura was also doing group workshops. So I went to a few of them and I was asking her every scientific question. And she was like, you've got to find this place, the Forever Family Foundation. And I ended up getting involved. Yeah,
do you know Lloyd Auerbach?
I know Lloyd really well. He's president of Forever Family Foundation.
He's been on this show before, so he's a good guy.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
So it sounds like you really did your research. I mean, I know a lot of people who they would say that they have psychic abilities and some are mediums, but I didn't do research on these people. I just got to know them as individuals. But what I like about what you did is that and maybe this is your skeptical side coming through, you took a lot of time to look into what's going on with mediums, particularly evidential mediums, people that could give you evidence that they're making connections with spirits that you want them to connect with. So I think you deserve a lot of credit for that, because a lot of people I know just say, oh, I've got a problem, I'm going to go get a psychic reading, and they don't know who the hell they're going to, or whether that person is competent or not. So you deserve a lot of credit for doing that. Well, tell us what happened then.
Yeah, so I reached out to Forever Family Foundation. It was founded by Fran and Bob Ginsberg in 2002 after the passing of their daughter Bailey. And Bob, I guess just like me, didn't believe in any of this. Fran was more open to it. And so they got a board of scientific researchers and scientists. And they also set up protocols where they certify psychic mediums who get tested through science-based protocols, not so different from Windbridge. They have to get accurate information, highly specific, on people they don't know. And they certified mediums. And now sadly, Fran has passed away, but she became like a second mom, my mentor. So she became like a core person in my life. But at the same time, I started volunteering with Forever Family. They did conventions, they did grief retreats, and I ended up getting really close with some of the mediums there. First, I got readings with them before they knew who I was, under fake names. And oh my God. So I started getting accurate readings. Actually, even before I went to Laura's workshop, I ended up finding another medium, and I went in under like a hidden identity, and she was so accurate. And then I tried different readings too, and from different mediums, some Bridge, some not. And this was before I knew Forever Family. And I feel like I got to taste different types. Some were terrible, and some were absolutely blew me away, and some were in between. And so
Without
then,
you, without using names,
yeah.
give us an example of the terrible experiences you had,
Okay, I
if
had
you want
three
to.
terrible. Oh, I
Yeah.
don't mind. I had three terrible experiences, and they were not part of Windbridge. They were not Forever Family, just so you know. They were just, well, the first terrible one I'd say was the hardest emotionally, because it was early on, and I thought she might most likely be real. So,
And you were
um,
looking for something about your
I was
dad
looking for
too.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for evidence, and that of just survival of consciousness. I'd have been just as fine if like my grandma came in really evidentially, as long as it was evidential. Because if one person is coming in accurately, that just means consciousness survives. So, and then I'm pretty confident my dad, if consciousness survives, I'd see my dad again. He's not gonna be like, oh, I'm there, I'm gonna ignore you. So I had this wonderful medium reading. Then I went to another, and she was like, I could tell she was really kind, but not very accurate. I sense know people who know her, and they say she's very genuine hearted, but yeah, not accurate. So I was a little shaken by that. So then the one I went to after her, that was one of the three worst I've ever seen. And she was also completely dishonest, I think. That was my conclusion. So examples, let's see. So she just got nothing accurate, and I would be quiet, and she kept saying, well, what is it you want to get out of this reading? I guess she thought I was going to talk a lot more. And I said, I want evidence that our consciousness survives bodily death. I want you to give me accurate information that you couldn't know. And oh, she just starts having me she just was like, I don't think she knew what to do with that. I think she's used to people who are just, you know, spew their whole life to her, or like, yeah, I don't know, but she didn't really know what to do with that. So she starts taking me in chance. I end up having to tell her it was my dad I lost. I just kind of gave up. And she was saying things like, your dad wants you to know that when you try to get into a proving situation, this isn't about proving. It's not my job to prove this to you. It's your job to prove it to yourself. And I was like, right, but that if I'm proving this to myself, that would be my gathering statistical data from mediums giving me accurate information. That would be proving it, like through actual data. And she was like, I was like, so how would I even do that? Like, I was just like, I'm stuck on this fucking call. Like, let me at least like learn something about, I don't know what. Like, I would have had every right to ask her for money back, but I was also researching this quite a bit. And I was like, let me just, I'd read enough about the history of the research to know that you encounter a lot of fake mediums. And I'd already been lucky with my very first reading. And then the other woman I'd met, Laura, I got really lucky with her because, even though it's taken a while to get a private reading, nevertheless, I've gone to watch her do group readings, and she's just astronomical. So I'd gotten really, really lucky.
Well, so
And
let's go back to the medium that you didn't get the good reading from.
oh yeah. Oy.
How did you find her?
So interestingly, the same way I found the first one that was so good and sort of underground. I had gone to an event series with my mom, actually two different ones. So my mom, through her work, first there was a talk. So my mom's a therapist, a psychoanalyst, and she works with a lot of neuroscientists. And one of the people in her committee who she worked with had passed away, and there was a book, someone had written a book about his work, as well as some of the other people my mom's mentioned in it, some of their research and work. So there was a reading for this book, and the wife of the man who'd passed away was there, and she was like, oh my god. So I went to this medium, and I was just starting my research. My poor mom's like, oh god, this crazy stuff again, my daughter's gonna be obsessed. So I got the name of the medium she went to, and that was
Hmm.
the amazing one. Then
Yeah.
we went to a series. Someone in my mom's institute was doing a series actually on some psi research. My mom was in charge of the program, and she would have never allowed this ever. She thought it was crazy, but then I was like, Mom, you have to allow this. You have to. So she let this woman give this series of talks, and I got to go. And someone there mentioned her friend had gone to medium. So I was like, oh, let me get the name. And that was ended up being the terrible one.
Mm,
Just terrible. It was like, I will say to this day, she's one of the three worst. The other being one of those, like $500 candle ones, like the storefront ones where they offer $5 readings and you go in and then they try to close the reading by telling you need to spend like $500 on a crystal or candle because you have like dangerous energy. So I went to that much later in my research, knowing this most likely was going to be fake. I wasn't that vulnerable. So I was just like, it went exactly how I expected. And I got to test myself as a sitter. And the other third one was a seance that was complete fake stage magic. So I wasn't shocked by that. I was much more shaken by the first one
tell me
of the
about
three.
the seance, because I've been in a couple of seances. Just tell me what your experience was.
Ooh, did you think, I just have to ask, did you think they were real? Were they genuine, you think?
Well, I trusted the people and I knew
Okay.
all the people. So it wasn't like I just picked somebody who was going to be a medium and, hey, let's have a
Mhm.
seance. I think that helped, the fact I knew some people.
Yeah, I really want to try to get into a genuine one, because this one, I wrote about in my book, actually. I don't name his name, I just call him seance medium. That's actually one of my policies, is if someone's not good, I'm not going to give their real name. I'm just not a
Right.
namer and shamer, but like at least educate people about the theories and process and why I concluded something was fake. Um, this was just absurd. So it was held out in Lilydale, and which is a village in upstate New York of like psychic mediums. Some of it, it's really fun. Some of it's very woo and not as science as maybe I try to approach this. Some of it, there have been some mediums that I know that are excellent that go there and work there, but there's also a lot of, there aren't, University of Virginia isn't there assessing it. I'll just put it that way. But I can't say, it's really fun. It's really worth checking out. And it's hit or miss with the mediums, because there are some amazing ones I know that have been involved there. And so I go out for this 3-night seance. The first night is a talk. The second night, the seance is part 1 of the seance. And the third night is part 2 of the seance. And oh my God. So it just closes, like he goes into this thing called a cabinet, and that's like a little tent. And
Hmm.
apparently I've heard from, I don't know if you know Leslie Kane, who researches.
She's
Yeah,
writes for the New York Times, right?
she does. And she's written about the UFO report. She's written
Yeah, that's
a
where
book.
I've heard about it lately. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I trust her assessment. And she had gone to different ones, which she covers in her book, Surviving Death, which was made into the Netflix series.
Right,
And
I've seen that.
yeah. Oh, so you
Sure.
must have seen Fran Ginsburg if you saw it, my mentor who passed. If you watched the one on Forever Family, the grief retreat, that episode, I think it was episode 4.
I'd have to go back and watch it. I'm sure I've
Yeah.
seen it before.
Yeah. Well,
So anyway, this
so
seance was
the
not good.
seance. Yeah. And Leslie, I ended up speaking with her a little bit about it. And she said the one she had assessed was real. He's not in a cabinet. She could really see him. And this guy was like locked himself in this cabinet tent. You couldn't see him. It was pitch black. And you start hearing him like roaring and stomping in the cabinet. So right away I was like, oh, this is gonna be bullshit. And it's just, I mean, at one of the nights, for some reason, he picked me as like his favorite person, which was weird. Like he kept calling me up for like these extra things. And I actually talked about the medium who knows who he is and doesn't think highly of this medium at all. And he was just like, oh, he was scared of you because you were asking all these science questions. He wanted to keep you in control because he was afraid you were just going to be like, this is bullshit, or expose him in some way, which, I was very polite during the experience, but he called me up to the front. He said he was like, got this, like the big drama was getting ectoplasm, and he suddenly like manifested ectoplasm, and he called me up to get a close look, and it was like a Santa beard. Like you could buy it at like any kid's costume store around Halloween. It was literally a Santa beard or just a big pile of cotton. And I snuck in the back after it was over and he was still entertaining. And I found the suitcase with all the props. I mean, they were exactly what I expected, you know, with the Santa beard sitting on the top. I mean, but it was so obvious. I was like, does he think I think this is ectoplasm? And I mean, in one sense, it was funny. In another sense, it was really tragic because people believed him and he was telling things like he'd had his guides who were coming in, you know, of course, under having the same voice he has. And they were coming in and telling people, calling out people in the audience and saying that they had abilities. You know, one he knew wanted to be a healer. And you could see this was just like he was lying to people about their dreams. And that's
And
just unacceptable.
charging them a bunch of money too.
Yeah, he doesn't charge as much as others, but it was like, what was it? It was like 100 a night, so 200.
Hmm.
I might have been give or take a little more, a little less, but it wasn't astronomical. But it wasn't. I mean, with all those people there, he didn't do too bad, you know, and he lied. You know, it's just horrible. Like he could do stage magic and make it fun and be honest
Right?
about it. Nothing wrong with some good stage magic.
Are you familiar with the skull experiments?
Yes,
Yes, there you go.
yes. Yeah. And those seem
That
to be
seems,
genuine.
yeah, they
So,
do. They do seem to be
mhm,
genuine. So
yeah.
mediums, seances, uh,
Hmm.
it sounds like one of the lessons to learn from that is um, you almost, and this is where organizations like Lloyd Auerbach's Forever Family come in. You kind of want to pick your services from an approved list of service providers rather than just going by word of mouth. Or is that fair to say?
Yes. Well, depending whose word of mouth. Is it a researcher? Is it someone
Uh,
who's super skeptical? Or is it, yeah, because I mean, I met plenty of people who swore by seance medium and they're not lying. They're just believy people, which, you know, I
mhm.
mean, you know, so not everyone's questions they're skeptically. So yeah, you want to go through places that have been vetted by researchers. Or if you have a friend who's really skeptical, do they demand evidence? How educated are they about this world? You know, so Forever Family Foundation, I think, is really, I mean, I'm a little biased because, you know, but I
Mhm.
help, but their list of vetted mediums are, you know, they've followed really, they passed really intense testing. I mean, another good place, you know, the Windbridge Institute. If you, I believe most of the teachers at the Arthur Findlay College in England, most of them take Zoom or phone calls. And I think the teachers there overall are very good. You know, but even the best mediums once in a while will have an off day. That's, I think,
Sure.
important to know. So if you go to a really good medium and it's just not a good reading, like that doesn't mean consciousness doesn't survive. That just happens once in a while. And if it's really bad, a good medium will give you your money back.
What I guess I have learned from the mediums that I know about is um, they're just, well, I guess maybe that's where the word medium comes from. They're just transmitting information they're getting. It's kind of up to you in a way to interpret the evidentiary part of it. So I think that's something that some people miss out on. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I mean, if they're giving really that's a fine line. If they're giving super obscure things and you're like, ooh, let me try to make that fit, you don't want to do that. But you also, I think some mediums that maybe could be really good and maybe they're still developing their abilities a bit, might get information and then over-interpret it because it's a little bit
Hmm.
like playing charades. So they might, let's say my dog who passed away is named Peanut. So if they're like,
Hmm.
oh, we see your dad coming in, and let's say they've decided, and I mean, a medium can speak this better than I can. So this is just an example, but like, let's say they see peanuts and they're like, oh, I see him eating, like, you know, they keep hearing peanut and they're like, oh, like, let's say they associate peanuts with carnivals, and they're like, oh, did he love to go to
Mhm.
carnivals? I'd be like, no. And they're like, I don't know, I keep hearing the word peanut. I'm be like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, that's my dog,
Dog,
but
right?
and that's like kind of a clunky example, but I hope that gets the concept across.
Yeah. Now, did I also read in some of your stuff on your website, you experimented, maybe that's the wrong word, with ghost hunting groups?
No, I didn't experiment, but I mean, I
Oh,
took classes with Lloyd Arbach,
okay.
so
Well, no,
and
he's,
learned about ghost hunting. So I took classes, but not, he does online at the Rhine. So I learned about the
now,
concepts of
what did you
I have
learn from, what did you learn from Lloyd about spirit investigation?
okay, well, specifically about spirit investigation, I've learned overall so much from him. But regarding spirit investigation, that there's a lot of misconceptions that people will you don't really know, like people will take the little spirit boxes, I believe, I haven't been on one, and they will say, oh, it's going up and it's reacting, that means it's a ghost.
Mm,
There is no equipment, we don't know enough of what this non-local consciousness is, how it operates. There's no equipment that can actually measure it. That could be anything, making it could be, you know something in the atmosphere in the location. It could be, electricity, like if, you're too near the refrigerator and you don't realize it's emitting, or it could be, which is a little still more like psi non-normal, but it could be your own consciousness can affect material objects. So it could be the consciousness. It's a huge, huge, huge leap, and totally not scientific and not accurate yet to think that spirit boxes and all the EMF meters reacting
mhm,
means that it's someone who's passed away. So, if mediums are getting accurate information, if you get an EVP, like electronic voice phenomena, on your phone app and you get a name, and it's taking that together, and then if there's the correlation of the EMF meters going off, maybe it's worth considering, but that doesn't mean that it's a ghost. Also, the difference between hauntings versus apparitions. I'm mixed up
mm.
which is which, but that sometimes if people keep seeing what is called a ghost, it could be like a recording, an imprint in that location.
Residual, residual haunting.
Residual haunting, yeah. Yeah. And that doesn't mean it's conscious.
Yeah.
Or it could be conscious. So it's sort of the difference between watching a recording of, like, any of you listening to podcasts now versus us actually talking on Zoom right now.
I belong to two ghost hunting groups here in Washington State. One, I guess I don't want to say I made the mistake of starting myself. The other one, I was a part of that, but I really relate to what you're saying. There's this group of people who have all these gizmos, EMF meters, recording devices, cameras, and then there's people who are sensitive or intuitive, and they're supposed to kind of work together. But you're right. If you come up just because your EMF meter is jumping all over the place, that doesn't mean there's anything there except electromagnetic field, which is not a ghost. So, yeah, I see the problem. See that problem very well. Um,
Yeah.
so let's get to the good part of this. At least I think the good part of this, as far as you're concerned, reconnecting with your dad. Tell me, and I'm assuming that happened. So tell
Uh,
me how that happened.
I mean, multiple times. The first medium reading. And then it's just been kind of trying to develop a regular communication, more medium readings. I got some things that I would conclude are probably signs. I know signs can sound a little woo and out there, but I think there are probably some signs I've gotten. And
Like what?
okay, I'll give well, so this one's in my book, and then I can give another interesting experience with one. So I was walking, just taking a walk, and I was walking through Central Park, and if you haven't been there, you've definitely seen it in movies, the Central Park boat pond. And when I was little, I remember a lot of people would have like model boats out in the pond, and I haven't seen that in years. Another thing I'll add, I'm a New Yorker. I walk really fast. I don't like mosey along. And for some reason, I start passing the boat pond that I've passed millions of times. Again, normally walk fast. I start getting into this like really dreamy, meditative state. And I just decide to start like walking, when you sort of zone out. I start walking like really slowly, and I notice a model boat kind of pulled over on the side of the pond. And I sort of like mosey over, and I decide to stare at this. I'm like compelled for some reason, I guess is the best way to say this, to go look at this boat. And I walk over and I look, and it had my dad's name on it. And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I'm still so mad at myself I didn't take a picture, but this was still early on. I was like, take a picture. And I'm like, oh, I'm being a crazy person. Don't take a picture. There's no way. And yeah, his name was just written on the side. And
Cool.
that
Very
was
cool.
very cool. And then there's been a lot of little things like that. Like, yeah, one other time. So he had a hobby that was really important to him. I never say what it is because it's so evidential the few times mediums have gotten it. In my book, I call it poker. And I was feeling really upset one day, and I was like, mediums never have gotten this. I don't know why. This makes me not like, could this be fake? And I was like, and I had said this to a medium who's excellent medium. He's become one of my good friends, Joe Peretta. I'd said that to him early on when I met him. And Joe's like, yeah, maybe he wants to keep it between the two of you. I was like, maybe, but it's sort of annoying. So fast forward a few years later, Joe and I become good friends, and we started doing these experiments together, which were really interesting, really fun, like meditation, evidence testing, like trying to do little mini seances, even if it was just the two of us, like seeing if our minds could affect dice and move
Mhm,
feathers, and some interesting things happened. Not skull level, but and
mhm,
so one day I said to my dad, I was like, Dad, I'm so annoyed. Like, I'm meeting with Joe tonight. Can you just tell him what this sign is? And I'd already kind of given Joe asked a few questions, like not trying to like fish for what it is, just to help me. He's like, do you think it might just be so obscure? And so I lied to Joe to like give him a lot of misdirection about what it was about. Cause I was like, I'm not giving him any information. So I completely lied to him about like his questions. And so he like answered, he's like, yeah, it's probably then why no medium's gotten it. I'm like, well, that doesn't make me feel better because like I just completely lied to you. Of course I didn't tell him that. So we
mhm,
go and start doing these meditations. And Joe said he like saw he felt like he like asked to get the sign is, and he saw like what it was like drop down in front of him. And he was like, oh, well, Liz is going to be disappointed. This isn't going to be it because I told him it was something so obscure. And he's like, well, it doesn't match what she told me. But again, I'd lied to him. So afterwards, he's like, yeah, he's like, I asked your dad. Sorry, I don't think I got it, but this is what he showed me. And he just said, like, the second he saw my face, I start like bawling. I was like, holy shit. Then the next day, and again, we're like good friends. Like you don't over question whether you text your friend or not. And the next day I'm standing waiting for the subway. I'm like, I can't believe Joe got that. I should text him. Let me text him and say how great that was. And I'm like arguing with myself, like overthinking whether I should text him about this, which, you know, who does that, with a friend? Like, yeah, like after a date or after like, working with a new boss, starting a new job, you might overthink like that, but you don't with your good friends. So I'm way overthinking, arguing in my head whether I send him this one dumb text. It was just like a dumb text. Like, how cool was that? So I finally just send it to him. It was like this urgent, like the subway's about to come. You're going to lose service. Send it now. I was like, okay, I'll send it. And as soon as I text him, he writes back, oh my God, like, holy shit, wait. And he takes a photo of the sign, the thing that it was. He's like, I was in a store just now. I saw like a model, like a sample of the thing that's your dad's thing. And he said, I told him, if this was really you last night, tell Liz to text me within 15 minutes. And he set his timer, and this was 5 minutes later, and I texted him. So
wow.
that was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I would say so. I
Yeah.
would say so.
Yeah.
Um, so What? So you've learned a lot. You probably learned a
Oh
lot
yeah.
about yourself, and you've learned a lot about how the world operates, really, not just the stuff that we're told that happens. Two questions, I guess, and maybe this is where we'll kind of end up things. So you use the word woo a lot, and I hear that word a lot. What does that mean, and is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Um, so I think it means I define it as kind of making out there extraordinary claims with no evidence, and you're not even interested in the evidence. You just are going to believe it.
You're a
And
believer.
yeah, and I think it's neutral. It's neither bad nor good. It depends how it's applied. Some of the medical theories, I would say, might hurt people and aren't so good. If you're really wanting to get evidence, if you're in deep grief and you don't think an afterlife is very possible, or if you're struggling, if you're terminal yourself or very ill yourself, and you're trying to reach out to get something very tangible and you haven't necessarily thought an afterlife is probable, you know, it's probably kind of hurtful. Um, Otherwise, it's also probably just really fun. Like, not everyone has to approach this with an evidence-based perspective. I'm approaching this much more like science than spirituality. Some people just really have a great time with this stuff and enjoy this. I don't think it's not at all bad in that situation. It really, like most things, I guess, depends how it's applied. And I think it can be, if in terms of getting this field respected as a serious study, it can be a little detrimental, but both sides can be a little detrimental about that. The side that's just so set in the viewpoint that they refuse to look at the data objectively or at all. They're just as hurtful, and they just dismiss it all as, quote unquote woo. That's my take on it.
Are you familiar with a guy who's no longer with us, but his legacy is Charles Fort?
No.
And 14, I used to belong to a group here in Olympia, which is where I'm at, 14 researchers, and they're kind of all based on Charles Fort. But one of our slogans was to make the paranormal normal, because I think a lot of people won't, and I see this. I've done things like I've been an investigator for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and all these weird things I'm into. But some people hesitate to tell you about the strange things that happen to them because they don't want to come across as a nutcase. And the 14 research part of this was like, well, let's have more people express themselves as far as the weird things that happen to themselves, to the people, so that they won't be characterized as being a nut job. And I guess when I hear that word woo, I think maybe I'm kind of along the same lines you are, that maybe we need to make woo more respectable. And maybe one way to do that is research. That seem
Well,
reasonable to you?
yeah, well, I don't think woo I never see as like respectable. I can see it, as I said, either very fun or very detrimental, depending. I think just I almost see saying that this stuff is, there's a huge body and approach to this phenomena that's not woo at all. That's science, and to me, woo is more just, it's not taking it very seriously, which again can be
Frivolous.
so much fun, but
Yeah.
it's not my approach. I mean, yeah, I mean, before I believe this, I might take the approach that, like, you go to a fun like party and, psychic entertainment, and but I guess I think I'm, to me it's a really, I guess it feels important a little bit what you said, but taking away the word woo from a portion of this and letting people really normalize and know that that's absolutely not the only approach to this. And there's a very serious scientific approach to this. And that the majority of people, when you start really talking to people, have had some inexplicable
Right.
experiences. They just
Right.
dismiss them or don't talk about them, and making
Right.
it, removing the stigma.
Yeah, that's what it is. I think woo becomes kind of stigmatic in a way.
Mhm.
And I think we kind of miss out on really what's going on with the world by denigrating people's experiences. Yeah, so I think we're probably on the same page there. One last kind of question. I have a feeling you've got a mission in life.
I hope.
Yeah, tell us about that
Yeah.
mission.
Oof. I mean, I'm a little bit trying to figure it out. I guess I have hopefully a few missions. So definitely one related to What the Fuck Just Happened, the podcast and book. I'm writing another book too. I'm hoping to help people who both struggle with grief and their own mortality, because even if someone's not terminally ill, like we're all in one sense, we're all terminal from
Yeah,
the day we're
generally,
born. Yeah. To help give us give people who are a lot more skeptical, who approach this from a logical point, who are either atheists, agnostics, who don't relate to anything belief based, to give people tangible hope and reason to think that there's more than just this life, that there's survival of consciousness. Because I know before I started researching all this, I thought you either consciousness was created by a brain, and when you die, or like the Judeo-Christian heaven, which made no sense to me. And I remember when my dad was in hospice, like lying in the room with my mom, like crying, and she's like, "Oh, don't you just wish you believed in God and heaven?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I really wish." And we were both just like, "But it makes no sense." So letting people know at that moment there's a very logical thing they can turn to that hope gives them maybe like tangible hope and eases grief or fear of their own mortality.
yeah. What's your other book going to be about? What's it going to be called?
Oh, well, the other book for this, I'm still debating the name. I might also call it like WTF Just Happened too, with like another tagline, or I might call
Okay.
it WTAF, like it's still happening. I'm still playing with names a little, but it's picking up where this one left off. So,
Okay. Tell
but
us again, our listeners, where they can get your book.
oh, sure. So you can go to my website, WTFJustHappened.net, and it links to Amazon where you get my book. And right now you can get it in paperback or Kindle. I'm in the middle of recording the audiobook, so that will be ready at some point, hopefully not too far down the line. And you can also find my podcast there too. And it's
Are
available on all
you
podcast apps.
are you on YouTube?
I am. Yep.
Okay.
WTF Just Happened.
Cool. Cool. Well, Liz, I want to thank you for spending time with us today. Uh, the thing I like about what I do with this podcast, I get to talk to a very large population of interesting people, and you fall into that category. And so I hope that maybe at some point in time you can, after you get your next book done, you could come back and talk to us. And if you think, based on your experience here, if you think that you could suggest a guest or some list of guests that we might approach to be on the podcast, we're always open to that. But thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Sure, anytime. All right, be careful
Thanks.
back there in New York City.
Thank you.